The girl by the street corner. It was a bright afternoon in downtown Palo Alto, but the streets felt quieter than usual. The kind of quiet that makes you notice small things, the sound of a bicycle bell, the soft hum of a coffee grinder from a shop nearby, the way sunlight spilled lazily over the sidewalk. Sundar Pichai had just stepped out of a meeting that had drained him more than he cared to admit. He had told his assistant he wanted to walk for a bit to clear his head. He wasn't looking for anything or anyone, but life has a strange way of placing people exactly where you will see them. Across the street, near a faded brick wall covered in ivy, there was a small foldable table. On top of it, a few scattered sheets of paper fluttered in the breeze. The drawings were done in bright colors, blues, yellows, and deep reds, but the paper edges were curled. The colors a little uneven, as if they had been made with cheap supplies. A little girl sat behind the table. She couldn't have been more than 10. Her hair was tied in a loose ponytail, and her small hands clutched a crayon like it was the most important thing in the world. What caught Sundar's attention wasn't the artwork at first, it was the sign in front of her. It was made from an old piece of cardboard, written in uneven letters. Selling my drawings to help pay for my chemo. He froze for a second. It wasn't the kind of thing you just walk past. People hurried by, glancing quickly and then turning their heads away, the way people do when they feel guilty for not helping. A few coins and small bills sat in a plastic cup beside her. The amount wasn't much, maybe enough for a sandwich or bus fare. Sundar stepped closer, his footsteps slow, almost hesitant. The girl looked up at him with a smile that was far too bright for someone who had just written those words on cardboard. "Hi, sir," she said softly. "Do you like art?" Her voice had that mix of hope and nervousness. He nodded, leaning slightly to see the drawings. They were simple: a house with a red roof, a tree with green circles for leaves, a picture of what looked like her and someone else holding hands under a blue sky. But there was a warmth in them, a kind of sincerity you don't often see in art galleries. "These are really beautiful," Sundar said gently. "Did you make them all yourself?" She nodded quickly. "Yes. I draw them after school. Well, when I can go to school." Her eyes flickered down for a moment, and Sundar felt that heavy pause, the one where a child is trying to say something without saying too much. He picked up one drawing, a picture of a girl standing next to a dog with a rainbow in the background. "Who's this?" he asked. She smiled again. "That's me. And that's Max. He used to be my dog before we had to give him away." He wanted to ask why, but something told him he already knew. A car honked somewhere down the street, pulling him out of the moment. "How much for this one?" he asked. She shrugged. "Whatever you want to give. Every dollar helps." It wasn't the kind of answer you give when you know the value of your work. It was the answer of someone who was used to taking whatever life offered, no matter how little. Sundar reached for his wallet, but then stopped. This wasn't about just buying a drawing. He wanted to know her story. "What's your name?" "Emma," she said, her voice steady now. "Emma Flores. And you're selling these to help pay for your treatment?" She nodded again, still holding on to that smile like it was her shield. "Yeah, my mom says we're almost out of money. She's working 2 jobs. I thought, maybe if I help, maybe she won't have to work so much. And maybe we can pay the bills for the hospital." Her words were simple, but Sundar felt them like a punch to the chest. He thought about his own childhood, the struggles his family faced, the small sacrifices his parents made so he could have opportunities they never had. He looked around. People kept walking by. Some glanced at the girl and quickly turned away. Others didn't even notice. It was as if her struggle existed in a different world, invisible to the rest. "Emma," he said quietly, "how much do you need?" She blinked, not expecting the question. "For the treatment?" "I don't know exactly. My mom says it's a lot. More than $10,000. Maybe more." She said it the way a child might talk about the number of stars in the sky, too. Big to really count. Thought the number didn't scare Sundar. It wasn't about the money. It was about what he was feeling in that moment. Something told him there was more to this than just buying a few drawings. Just then, a man in a dark hoodie approached. The table. He looked at the artwork, smirked, and, without a word, reached into the cup and took one of the larger bills. Emma's eyes widened. Hey, that's... Before she could finish, the man walked off. Sundar's jaw tightened. He stepped forward. Excuse me, he called out. The man ignored him and kept walking. For a split second, Sundar thought about letting it go. But then he saw the look on Emma's face, that mix of hurt and helplessness. No child should feel that way. He followed the man. Asterisk the chessy. The moment Sundar stepped away from the little table, the sounds of the street seemed to grow sharper. The chatter of people, the faint rumble of a bus approaching, the rustle of wind. In the trees, all of it faded under the single focus in his mind. The man in the dark hoodie was already a good 20 steps ahead, moving fast but not fast enough to look suspicious. Sundar's stride lengthened, his shoes clicking against the pavement. He wasn't used to doing this kind of thing, but something inside him refused to just stand there and watch a child lose the little money she had struggled to earn. He weaved through the light afternoon crowd, dodging a woman with a stroller and stepping around a delivery cart. The hoodie man didn't turn around. He had that relaxed arrogance in his walk, like he was certain no one would follow. Sundar noticed his left hand was shoved into his pocket while his right hand held the folded bill, rolling it between his fingers, casually as if it were his by right. Sundar's heart was beating, faster than it had in his morning meeting. This wasn't about the amount of money, it was about the principle. It was about the way Emma had looked when she realized someone had just taken from her without even pretending to buy something. He thought about her small frame behind that folding table, the quiet pride she had in those drawings, and the courage it must take for a child to sit there day after day, asking strangers for help. Hey. Sundar called out again, his voice louder this time. A few heads turned, but the man in the hoodie kept walking. He picked up his pace. I said, hey, stop for a second. Finally, the man half turned, his face hidden under the hood's shadow. His eyes narrowed, scanning Sundar quickly, sizing him up. What? He said, his voice flat, almost bored. You took money from that little girl's cup, Sundar said, his tone controlled but firm. Put it back. The man laughed under his breath. What are you there, please? It's just a few bucks. Maybe she should get a real job. That casual cruelty hit Sundar harder than the theft itself. He stepped closer, his presence calm but unyielding. She's a child. She's selling her own drawings to pay for her chemotherapy. You don't get to take from someone who's fighting for her life. The man shrugged, as if the words meant nothing to him. Life's tough. Get over it. There was a pause, and Sundar realized the man wasn't going to hand the money back. His mind worked quickly. There was no point in escalating this into a scene that could get dangerous, especially with Emma watching from across the street. Instead, Sundar pulled out his wallet. He took out a $50 bill and held it between two fingers. You want money? Take this. But you put that 20 back in her cup. The man's eyes flickered at the sight of the 50. Greed and calculation danced in them. Slowly, he handed back the crumpled 20, and Sundar took it without a word. Then he handed over the 50. Nice doing business with you. The man muttered, pocketing the larger bill before walking off without a backward glance. Sundar didn't care. He turned back toward the little table. Emma was watching him, her small hands clutching the edges of her drawings, as if afraid someone might take those too. When he placed the 20 back into her cup, she let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. You got it back, she said quietly, almost in disbelief. Of course, Sundar replied gently. It's yours, you worked for it. Emma's eyes shimmered in the sunlight, but she quickly looked down, pretending to organize the papers on the table. Most people, they just walk away, she said, her voice almost a whisper. He stayed there for a while, asking her about her drawings, about her favorite colors, about Max, the dog. With each answer, he could see a little more of her opening up, as if she was starting to believe he actually cared about her answers. Then, from the corner of his eye, Sundar noticed a woman rushing toward them. She looked exhausted, her hair pulled back messily, her clothes worn but clean. Her eyes darted to Emma first, and when she saw Sundar standing there, she froze, a flicker of worry crossing her face. Emma, the woman said quickly. Are you okay? Who's this? Emma smiled. Mom, this is Sundar. He bought one of my drawings. Sundar stepped forward slightly, extending a hand. I just happened to walk by, he said. Your daughter's work is really something special. The woman shook his hand cautiously. I'm sorry if she bothered you. I tell her not to. She didn't bother me at all, Sundar interrupted gently. In fact, I think she's inspiring. The woman looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether she could believe that. We should get going, she finally said. Emma, pack up your things. But before Emma could start gathering her papers, Sundar said, Actually, would you both let me buy all of them? Both of them looked at him in surprise. All of them? Emma repeated, as if she wasn't sure she'd heard right. Yes, he said, smiling. Every single one. I'll pay whatever you think is fair. Emma glanced at her mother, who looked uneasy. Sir, that's kind of you, but you don't have to. I know I don't have to, Sundar said softly, but I want to. Emma's mother studied his face. Something in her expression changed. Maybe she saw sincerity there. Maybe she just realized this wasn't an ordinary passerby. But then she asked a question that caught Sundar off guard. Why? She said quietly, why would a stranger care this much? And for a moment, Sundar didn't have an answer. Asterisk a memory he couldn't forget for a few seconds after her question. Sundar just stood there, his mind turning over thoughts faster than he could put them into words. The woman's eyes didn't waver. They were tired eyes, the kind that had seen too many bills pile up, too many restless nights, too many moments of having to choose between two bad options. He could see in them a quiet defensiveness, too, a protective shield she'd built. Over time, she wasn't used to kindness from strangers without strings attached. Finally, Sundar said, because I know what it feels like to need help, and to not know if it will come. Her expression softened just slightly, but she didn't speak. Emma, on the other hand, grinned as if she had just been handed a basket of sunshine. Mom, can we let him buy them? The woman hesitated, then nodded. All right, but only if you tell me your name, sir. He smiled faintly. It's Sundar. Something flickered across her face, a flash of recognition. Perhaps, but it passed quickly, like a shadow moving over water. She didn't comment on it. Instead, she began helping Emma stack the drawings. Sundar carefully placed them into a folder he'd bought from a nearby stationery shop while they packed up, slipping in more bills than the woman had suggested as fair. He didn't want to insult her pride, so he didn't announce the amount out as they worked. His mind drifted back to a memory he hadn't visited in years. He was 14 again, back in Chennai, standing outside a small grocery store with his father. A young woman had been selling handmade clay toys nearby, her hands dusty and cracked from work. She'd had a little boy with her, barely 5 years old, and he had been coughing so much it hurt to listen. Sundar's father had stopped, bought the toys without bargaining, and given the woman extra money quietly. We don't just help when we have plenty, his father had told him later. We help when we see someone needs it. Because once we were the ones who needed it, that lesson had never left him. And now, looking at Emma, it felt like the past had folded in on itself, delivering him back into a moment where he had a choice to walk away like so many others or to stay. So, what happens now? Emma asked as she handed him the last drawing. Now, Sundar said, you go home and rest, and maybe you let me visit you sometime. I'd like to hear more about your art. Emma's mother looked wary again. Why? Would you want to do that? She asked, her tone gentle but cautious. Because, Sundar replied, she has talent, and because I think you've both been carrying too much alone. The woman's lips pressed into a thin line, as if she was holding back something she wanted to say, then she sighed. Our apartment's a mess, but if you really mean it, you can come by. Just don't expect much. She reached into her purse, pulled out a torn piece of receipt paper, and wrote down an address. Sundar took it, folding it carefully into his pocket. I'll be there tomorrow afternoon, he promised. Emma beamed, clearly thrilled by the idea. They said their goodbyes, and Sundar watched as they walked away. The little girl chattering to her mother about what she might draw next. There was a lightness in her step now, a tiny ripple of joy breaking through the heaviness she carried. But as they turned the corner, Sundar stayed still, staring at the crumpled receipt paper in his hand. The address looked familiar, uncomfortably familiar. He pulled out his phone, typing it into a map app. His stomach tightened as the location popped up. He knew the street. He knew it because years ago he had sent money to someone who lived there, not once, but many times. Back when he was a graduate student, working long hours at Stanford, and barely getting by himself. A letter had come from India. It had been from the sister of a man who had once helped his family when they were struggling. She had written that she was now in the United States, but had fallen on hard times. She had a child and no steady income. Sundar had sent her what little he could. Small amounts at first, then more as he started earning. And then the letters had stopped. He'd wondered about her over the years. But life had swept him into a whirlwind of work, travel, and responsibility. He never heard from her again. Now, looking at that address, a cold realization crept over him. If it was the same woman, and deep down he suspected it was, then Emma was that child. The child of the woman he'd once helped, and somehow lost touch with. He didn't know if she remembered him. He didn't know if she even wanted to. But tomorrow, he was going to find out, and something told him. The truth might not be as simple as he hoped. Asterisk the apartment door the next afternoon. The sky hung low with heavy clouds, the kind that seemed to press down on the city, muting its colors and sounds. Sundar walked with steady steps toward the address, written on the small piece of receipt paper. The streets here were narrower, the buildings older, their paint chipped and weathered by time. The scent of rain lingered in the air, though the ground was still dry, as if the storm was biding its time. He passed a row of worn-out storefronts, a laundromat with flickering lights, a small convenience shop where an elderly man sat behind the counter reading a newspaper, and a bakery that smelled faintly of warm bread. These were the kinds of places that had stories etched into their walls, where life moved in quiet struggles and small victories. Turning onto the street from the map, Sundar immediately recognized it. The ache of memory settled in his chest. He had walked this road years ago, when he'd first come to visit a friend who lived nearby, back when his own life had been a maze of uncertainty. He could almost see his younger self, thinner, tired, still carrying the weight of proving himself in a new country. He stopped in front of a narrow building with a faded green door, its paint peeling away in long strips. The metal numbers above. They were crooked, one of them barely hanging on. The windows on the second floor had thin curtains, drawn tightly shut. This was it. As he raised his hand to knock, 1,000 questions crowded his mind. What would she say when she saw him? Would she even recognize him? Would she resent that he had disappeared from her life without explanation? Or worse, would she not remember him at all? The door opened before he could knock. Emma stood there, her face lighting up instantly. "You came?" she said, stepping aside to let him in. Inside, the air was warm but faintly stale, carrying the scent of cleaning detergent mixed with something faintly medicinal. The living room was small, with mismatched furniture, a worn couch covered in a neatly folded blanket, a low table with a few coffee stains, and a small bookshelf filled mostly with children's books and medical pamphlets. Emma's mother appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked surprised to see him so soon, but she didn't hide it. "You're right on time," she said quietly. He smiled. "I try to keep my promises." She gestured for him too. "Sit. I didn't expect you to actually come," she admitted. "Most people, they say nice things in the moment, but then life takes over and they forget." "I haven't forgotten," he replied, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made her look at him more closely. Emma disappeared into her room and returned, With a small stack of fresh drawings, she proudly handed them to him. I made these last night, she said, so you'd have new ones to see. He took them gently, flipping through the colorful pages. A field of flowers, a night sky with a bright moon, a picture of her and her mother holding hands. Each one seemed to carry a piece of her heart as he looked. The mother sat across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes lingered on him with a strange intensity, as though she was searching for something she wasn't sure she wanted to find. Finally, she asked, "Do I know you from somewhere?" The question hung between them like an echo. Sundar met her gaze, his voice steady. "We met a long time ago. You may not remember, but years ago you wrote letters to someone, asking for help. I sent what I could." Her face went still. The color drained slightly from her cheeks. You were the one?" He nodded. "I thought you stopped writing because you didn't need my help anymore. I wondered what happened. And now, seeing you here, I realized I didn't know the whole story." She looked away, her jaw tightening. "I stopped writing because I didn't want you to see what was happening to us. I didn't want pity." He leaned forward slightly. "It wasn't pity. It was gratitude. You helped my family once, long before we ever came to America. I wanted to return that kindness." Her eyes flickered with something between disbelief and pain. "Gratitude doesn't pay hospital bills. It doesn't keep landlords from knocking at your door. I was ashamed. Ashamed that after all that help, we were still drowning. So I cut off contact. It was easier to disappear than to keep explaining how bad things were." The room felt heavy now, the kind of heaviness that came from truths left unsaid for too long. Emma watched them quietly, sensing that something important was unfolding. Though she didn't fully understand what "you should have let me help," Sundar said softly. "It was never about the money. It was about making sure you and your daughter were safe." Her voice trembled slightly. "Safe isn't something we've had for a long time." Before he could respond, there was a sudden knock at the door. Loud, urgent, almost angry. The mother's shoulders tensed immediately. Emma's eyes widened, and she clutched the edge of her mother's sleeve. "Who is it?" Sundar asked. Quietly, the mother didn't answer. Instead, she rose and walked slowly toward the door, her hand hesitating on the knob. The knocking came again, harder this time. When she opened it, a man stood there. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a hard expression that carried no warmth. His gaze swept past her and landed on Sundar instantly. "We need to talk," the man said flatly. "Now," and from the look in the mother's eyes, Sundar knew this wasn't a friendly visit. Asterisk the man at the door for a moment. No one moved. The man stood framed in the doorway, rain beginning to speckle the shoulders of his jacket, his presence filling the small apartment like a storm cloud. The air seemed to thicken, pressing down on everyone in the room. Emma clung to her mother's sleeve, her wide eyes darting between the stranger and Sundar, as if trying to read something in their faces. The mother's voice came out tight, almost strained. "This isn't a good time, Robert." Robert's jaw flexed, his eyes hard. "I don't care if it's a good time. You've been ignoring my calls. You think that makes this go away?" Sundar's gaze flicked to the mother, catching the way her shoulders curled in slightly, a defensive instinct. He'd seen that kind of posture before, not in boardrooms, but in the lives of people who had been cornered too many times. "Emma, go to your room," her mother said softly, but firmly. Emma hesitated, looking at Sundar as if for reassurance, then slipped away quietly. The door to her room clicking shut behind her. Robert stepped inside without being invited, his eyes scanning the small apartment, lingering for a moment on Sundar as though weighing whether he was a threat or simply an inconvenience. "And who's this?" Robert asked, his tone laced with suspicion. "A friend," the mother replied quickly. Robert let out a short, humorless laugh. "A friend? Is he going to pay what you owe too?" Sundar's voice was calm, but it carried a firmness that cut through the tension. "Maybe you should explain why you're here before you start making accusations." Robert's gaze snapped to him, sizing him up. "I'm here because she owes me money. A lot of money. And she's been pretending I don't exist. It's not pretending, the mother said quietly. I just don't have it right now. Robert took a step closer. You've been saying that for months. You think the hospital's the only one sending bills? You think you can keep dodging me? Something in Sundar's chest tightened. He didn't like the way this man spoke. Not just the words, but the tone. The way he seemed to enjoy pressing down on someone already under strain. How much does she owe you? Sundar asked. His voice leveled out. Robert glanced at him, almost smirking. Why? You planning to play hero? Because unless you've got $8,000 lying around, you should probably stay out of it. The number hit Sundar like a sudden jolt. 8,000 wasn't small change, but it wasn't impossible either. Still, he didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned back to the mother. Is this true? She hesitated, her eyes on the floor. I borrowed from him. For the treatment, I didn't know what else to do. The insurance barely covers anything, and every round of chemo costs more than we can manage. I thought I could pay it back before She stopped herself, her voice cracking. Robert cut in sharply. Before I what? Before I came knocking? You knew the terms? Terms? Sundar asked, his voice now edged with suspicion. Robert's eyes narrowed. Let's just say I'm not a bank. I helped her when nobody else would, but help comes with expectations. Sundar understood immediately. This wasn't kindness Robert had offered, it was leverage. He'd seen this in different forms all over the world. The way some people profited off desperation, turning human struggle into a transaction they could milk. You'll get your money, Sundar said quietly. The mother's head jerked up. No, Sundar. You'll get it, he repeated, his eyes locked on Robert. But you won't set foot in this apartment again. Robert studied him for a moment, clearly weighing whether Sundar was bluffing. Then he shrugged, a slow grin spreading on his face. Fine. You've got 48 hours. After that, we're done talking. He turned and left, the door closing behind him with a dull thud dot for a moment. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the refrigerator. The mother sat heavily on the couch, her hands covering her face. You shouldn't have done that, she said, her voice muffled. You don't owe us anything. You've already done enough. Sundar sat across from her, leaning forward. This isn't about owing. This is about making sure Emma doesn't have to watch her mother get cornered in her own home. Her eyes glistened when she looked at him. You don't understand. Robert, he's not the kind of person who just walks away. If you get involved, he'll make it your problem, too. Sundar's voice softened, but it carried the steady certainty of someone who had navigated far bigger storms. Then he'll find out I'm not the kind of person who walks away either. In the silence that followed, Emma's door creaked open. She stepped out cautiously, holding one of her drawings, a picture of a tall man holding the hand of a small girl under a bright, oversized sun. She walked up to Sundar and held it out. This is for you, she said. He took it gently, studying the simple but powerful lines. Is this me? She nodded. You made the sun bigger? And though she didn't explain why, Sundar felt the meaning settle deep in his chest. But as he slipped the drawing into his folder, he knew 48 hours wasn't much time, and he still didn't know the full story of how her family had ended up here. And something told him. Finding that out might be the hardest part. Asterisk, the last. Truth rain began sometime in the night, steady and unrelenting, tapping against the apartment windows like a quiet metronome. Sundar had hardly slept. His mind kept circling back to the look in Emma's mother's eyes after Robert left. Not just fear, but something heavier, like a weight she had been carrying alone for years. He arrived at their building the next morning with a small folder tucked under his arm. Inside was enough to cover Robert's demand and then some, but money was only part of what needed to be resolved. There was still a story here, one he hadn't heard in full. And he knew that understanding it was just as important as paying the debt. Emma opened the door this time, still in her pajamas, her hair in a messy braid. She smiled sleepily. Mom's in the kitchen, she said, stepping aside. Her mother was at the counter, a cup of coffee cradled in both hands. She looked surprised to see him so early. You didn't have to come yet. You still have time. I know, Sundar replied. But there's something we should talk about before. I'd do anything else. She hesitated, then gestured toward the small dining table. They sat facing each other, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence between words. Why didn't you tell me the whole truth? Sundar asked gently. Her eyes flickered, then dropped to the table. Because the truth isn't simple, and it isn't something I'm proud of. He waited, saying nothing, letting the pause stretch until she finally spoke. Robert isn't just some guy I borrowed money from, she said. He used to be someone I thought I could trust. When Emma got sick, he was the first person to offer help. I thought it was kindness. I didn't realize until later that it was a trap. The money came with conditions. He wanted control over how I spent it, over my time, over US. When I pushed back, he reminded me of the debt. And every time I made a payment, he'd find a way to make me owe more. Her voice shook on the last word. Sundar's hands tightened on the folder in front of him. So he's been keeping you in this cycle. She nodded. And when I stopped writing too, you all those years ago, it wasn't just shame. It was because Robert saw your letters. He told me if I kept talking to you, he'd make things worse. I thought disappearing was the only way to protect you from him. The words landed heavily. All those years of silence. All the unanswered questions. Now they had a shape. And it was worse than he had imagined. You didn't have to protect me, Sundar said softly. I would have stood by you. Her eyes brimmed with tears. I didn't want to ruin your life the way mine was being ruined. Before Sundar could respond, Emma padded over with one of her sketchbooks, setting it on the table. I drew something last night, she said, flipping to a fresh page. It was a picture of 3 people, a woman, a little girl, and a tall man, standing together in front of a bright yellow sun. But in this drawing, the figures were standing on a hill, and the shadows behind them were fading away into the distance. This is us, Emma explained. And that's the bad guy leaving. She pointed to a small, dark figure at the edge of the page. Sundar met her mother's eyes. No words were needed. He slid the folder across the table. This will cover what you owe and give you a little extra, but it's not just about paying him off. I'm going to make sure he can't come back. Brow furrowed? How? Let's just say, Sundar said. I know people who deal with problems like Robert, legally and effectively, and he did a few quiet calls that afternoon to allow your friend to a local advocacy group that helped victims of predatory lending, set things in motion. By the time evening came, Robert was facing a formal complaint. His so-called agreements exposed for what they were, illegal, unenforceable intimidation tactics. 2 days later, he was gone. When Sundar visited again, the apartment felt lighter. The curtains were open, letting in a wash of afternoon sun. Emma was at the table, drawing, her crayons scattered around her like a small explosion of color. Her mother was cooking, humming softly under her breath. He's not coming back, she told Sundar, her voice a mix of relief and disbelief. He smiled. Good, now you can focus on what matters. He looked toward Emma, who was holding up a new drawing, this one of a girl standing in a field of flowers, holding a paintbrush like a sword. This one's for you, she said, because you made the bad guy go away. He took it gently, feeling the weight of her words. But he also knew something else. This wasn't about him being a hero. It was about her and her mother and the quiet resilience that had carried them through years of storms. As he left that day, Sundar thought about his father's old lesson. We don't just help when we have plenty. We help when we see someone needs it. And sometimes helping means more than money. It means standing in the gap when the world tries to close. And Emma stood in the doorway, weaving. Come back soon, she called. He nodded. Always. And for the first time in years, as he walked down that street, the sky felt wide open.